The wine glasses clinked and the laughter came easy, until my sister, Carol, turned toward me, her smile too sharp, and said something about my 2.5 marriages. The room, our parents' familiar dining room, heavy with the scent of roast beef and decades of shared history, erupted. It was Dad's 70th birthday, a milestone that should have been about warmth and celebration, not this familiar, bitter taste in my mouth. My son, Liam, all of 12 years old and blessedly earnest, went still beside me, his fork frozen midair, a piece of buttered roll halfway to his lips. His eyes, wide and innocent, flickered to mine for a split second, a silent question mark. I laughed it off, a brittle sound even to my own ears, the practiced response honed over years of Carol's casual cruelties. Oh, Carol, always the comedian, I managed, cheeks burning, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The laughter around the table, from aunts and uncles and cousins, felt like tiny, stinging pellets. But before I could execute my usual escape plan, a sudden need for the bathroom, a feigned phone call, her teenage son, Daniel, my nephew, a boy usually lost in the quiet world of his phone or his thoughts, stood up from across the long, polished mahogany table. And what he said didn't just offend me, it reshaped how the whole family saw her. The air in the room had been convivial just moments before. Dad, beaming at the head of the table, his thinning silver hair catching the light from the chandelier Mum insisted on using for special occasions. Mum, flushed and happy, fussing over everyone's plates. Even Carol had seemed softer earlier. We'd exchanged polite, if distant, pleasantries. I'd complimented her new haircut, a severe blonde bob that somehow made her features even sharper. She'd nodded, a brief, almost dismissive acknowledgement. I'd learned long ago not to expect more. Liam, next to me, had been happily chattering about his latest Lego creation, a spaceship of intricate design. He'd even managed to draw a smile from Uncle George, a man whose expressions usually ranged from mildly perturbed to deeply skeptical. I'd felt a small, quiet swell of pride, the kind that only a parent can understand, watching him navigate the sometimes treacherous waters of family gatherings with an unearned confidence I wished I possessed. Then came Carol's comment. It wasn't shouted. It was delivered with a sly, almost intimate cadence, as if sharing a delightful little secret with the entire table. Honestly, Sarah, with your track record, 2.5 marriages, we should get you a loyalty card for wedding venues. The half was the particularly vicious part. My first marriage to David had ended amicably enough after 5 years, a slow drift apart that left us both sad but not broken. My second, to Mark, Liam's father, had been shorter, a whirlwind that collapsed under the weight of his undisclosed gambling debts and the lies that came with them. The half, as Carol knew perfectly well, referred to Michael. We'd been engaged, the wedding planned, the white dress hanging in my wardrobe, a cloud of silk and hope. He'd called it off 2 weeks before, via email, a cowardly digital severing that had left me reeling, humiliated, and picking up the pieces of a life I thought we were building together. It had been 10 years ago, but Carol never let it, or any of my perceived failures, fade into the gentler light of the past. As the laughter, led by Carol's own high-pitched trill, washed over me, I focused on the intricate pattern of the lace tablecloth, a family heirloom. Each thread seemed to represent a barb, a slight, a moment of carefully disguised contempt I'd endured from her over the years. My smile felt stretched, a rubber band about to snap. I could feel Liam's small hand reach for mine under the table, his fingers giving a tentative squeeze. It was his silent way of offering comfort, a gesture that both warmed me and twisted the knife of Carol's words deeper. He shouldn't have to be comforting me, he was just a child. My gaze flickered across the table to Daniel. He was 16, a lanky, thoughtful boy who often seemed to carry the weight of the world on his young shoulders. Usually, at these gatherings, he'd have his headphones on until explicitly told to remove them, or he'd be absorbed in a book, a silent protest against the adult chatter. But tonight, his phone was screened down beside his plate. His brow was furrowed, a deep line appearing between his eyebrows that mirrored my father's when he was contemplating a difficult chess move. He'd set his napkin down, not crumpled, but deliberately folded beside his cutlery. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue inherited from his father, a man Carol had divorced with considerable acrimony years ago, weren't on me, but on his mother. He watched her as she basked in the laughter she'd orchestrated, her face animated, triumphant. I remembered another party, years ago. Liam had been a toddler, maybe 2. I'd just finalized my divorce from Mark and was struggling, a single mother trying to find her footing. It was Christmas Eve. Carol had gifted Liam a noisy, complicated toy, far too advanced for his age. "Don't worry, Sarah," she'd said, loud enough for everyone in the crowded living room to hear. "If you can't figure out how to assemble it, I'm sure one of your many male friends could help you. Or perhaps the next Mr. Right will be more mechanically inclined." The insinuation, the casual dismissal of my ability to cope, had stung. I'd mumbled something about the instructions being clear and retreated to the kitchen, blinking back tears, pretending to search for a missing serving spoon. No one had said a word in my defense then either. They'd just smiled vaguely or changed the subject. It was easier to let Carol have her moment, to let her words hang in the air, than to challenge her. Peace at any price, even if the price was my dignity. Or the time, at a summer barbecue, when I'd excitedly shared news of a small promotion at work. I was working as a paralegal then, long hours, little pay, but it was a step up. Carol had listened, a small, tight smile on her face. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd said, then turned to our cousin Susan. "Did I tell you Daniel's essay won the regional prize? He's being scouted for the advanced writing program." My small achievement shriveled, overshadowed. It was always like this, a subtle redirect, a casual undermining, a constant recalibration of my worth against some invisible, ever-shifting scale she controlled. Her digs were rarely direct enough to call out without sounding overly sensitive or aggressive. They were couched in concern, wrapped in humor, delivered with that sharp, knowing smile. "I'm just joking, Sarah. Honestly, you're so sensitive." That was her refrain if anyone, on the rare occasion, even hinted at her unkindness. The laughter in the dining room was starting to die down, replaced by a few lingering chuckles and the clinking of cutlery as people, slightly embarrassed perhaps, or simply moving on, resumed their meal. Carol, however, wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering. "Really, though, Sarah, what's your secret? Some women can't even find one husband, and you're practically collecting them." A fresh wave of uncomfortable tittering. My father cleared his throat, a small, unhappy sound, but he didn't speak. My mother busied herself offering more bread to Uncle George, her face averted. I felt myself shrink, drawing my shoulders in, wishing the heavy oak chair would swallow me whole. Liam's hand tightened on mine. His knuckles were white. I could feel his small body trembling slightly. This was worse than the usual barbs. This was a direct, sustained assault and in front of my son. That's when Daniel moved. He didn't scrape his chair back violently. It was a measured, deliberate sound, the wood groaning softly against the polished floorboards. It was enough to cut through the residual murmurs. Every head turned. He stood, not fully to his height, but pushing himself up straighter, his hands resting on the table. His face was pale, but his expression was resolute. My heart, already pounding, seemed to skip a beat, then another. What was he doing? Was he going to join in? Make a clumsy teenage joke? My breath caught in my throat. For a fleeting second, I saw Carol's expression shift, a flicker of surprise, then a hint of maternal pride, as if expecting him to deliver a witty punchline, to prove he was her son, sharp and quick. Daniel's gaze swept briefly around the table, a quiet assessment, then settled firmly on his mother. His voice, when he spoke, was not the cracking, uncertain tone of adolescence I sometimes still heard from him. It was lower, steadier, filled with a quiet clarity that was utterly disarming. "Mom," he began, and the single word hung in the air, silencing even the nervous coughs. "That's not funny." A stunned silence descended. Utter, absolute. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hall, a slow, ponderous beat. Carol's smile froze, then faltered. A flush began to creep up her neck. "What did you say, Daniel?" she asked, her voice tight, a warning edge to it. Daniel didn't flinch. He took a shallow breath. "I said, it's not funny. Aunt Sarah, she doesn't deserve that. None of it." He glanced at me then, a quick, almost shy look, but his eyes were full of an unexpected empathy that made my own well up. "Every time we all get together, it's something. You say you're joking, but it's not a joke if it hurts someone." My jaw had dropped. I stared at him, this serious boy, my nephew, who I'd always thought barely noticed the undercurrents in our family. Liam was staring too, his mouth slightly agape, his earlier distress replaced by a look of awe. Carol's face was now a mottled red. "Daniel, that's enough. You don't understand adult conversation." "I understand what's mean, Mom," he replied, his voice still quiet, but unwavering. "And that was mean. And everyone here," his gaze flickered around the table again, briefly touching on our grandparents, our aunts and uncles, "everyone just lets it happen." Or laughs. He wasn't accusatory, more bewildered. "Aunt Sarah is family. This isn't how we should treat family. It's not kind. And it's not true, what you imply." The word true resonated. He didn't elaborate on what he meant, which parts weren't true, but the implication was clear. He saw through the caricature his mother had painted of me. He saw the injustice. My father was looking at Daniel with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise, certainly, but also a dawning respect. My mother had her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. Uncle George had actually put his fork down and was staring, his usual skepticism replaced by something akin to shock. Cousin Susan, who often chimed in with Carol's jokes, was suddenly very interested in the contents of her wine glass. Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in as long as I could remember, she looked lost, uncomfortable, stripped of her usual armor of witty retorts and cutting remarks. She tried a different tack. "Daniel, you're embarrassing me. And you're upsetting your aunt, I'm sure." She glanced at me, a quick, appraising look, perhaps expecting me to smooth things over, to tell Daniel it was okay, to absolve her. But I couldn't speak. A wave of emotion, so strong it was almost physical, was washing over me. Gratitude, raw and overwhelming. Relief. And a profound sense of sorrow that it had taken a 16-year-old boy to speak a truth that all the adults in the room had ignored for years. Daniel simply shook his head slightly. "I think you're the one who's been upsetting Aunt Sarah, Mom, for a long time." He paused, then added, so quietly it was almost a whisper, yet everyone heard it, "I don't like it." With that, he pulled his chair back in, sat down, and picked up his fork. He didn't look at anyone. He just resumed eating, as if he'd merely commented on the weather. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, and profoundly different from the earlier hush. It wasn't stunned anymore, it was thoughtful. Awkward, certainly, but thoughtful. No one seemed to know what to say. The carefully constructed facade of happy family unity had cracked, and Daniel, with his simple, honest words, had exposed the ugliness beneath. My father finally broke the silence. He cleared his throat again, this time more decisively. "Well," he said, his voice a little gruff, "Daniel, that was quite something." He looked at Carol, a sternness in his eyes I hadn't seen directed at her in years. Perhaps we could all reflect on that. Carol didn't meet his gaze. She picked at her food, her earlier vivacity completely extinguished. She looked smaller, somehow less formidable. The sharp edges seemed, for the moment, to have been blunted. The rest of the dinner proceeded in a subdued, almost somber atmosphere. The conversation was stilted, polite. People talked about safe topics, the weather, Dad's golf game, a new series on television. But the elephant was still in the room, large and undeniable. I noticed glances being exchanged, not at me this time with pity or amusement, but at Carol with a new, critical assessment. Some looked at Daniel with a quiet respect. Liam, beside me, slowly relaxed. He finished his roll, then ate his dinner with a renewed appetite. He didn't say anything, but every now and then, he'd sneak a glance at Daniel across the table, a small, almost hero-worshipping smile on his face. I ate too, though I barely tasted the food. My mind was replaying Daniel's words, his quiet courage. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't been disrespectful, not really. He had simply spoken the truth, a truth that had been desperately needed. He had named kindness, respect, and truth as values that mattered more than bloodlines that excused cruelty or traditions of silence that enabled it. When the cake was brought out and we sang "Happy Birthday" to Dad, the forced cheerfulness felt different. It wasn't a papering over of cracks anymore. It felt like a tentative step towards something else, something more genuine, though what that was, I couldn't yet say. As the party began to break up, I went to find Liam's coat in the hallway. The old grandfather clock chimed the half-hour, its familiar melody suddenly less oppressive, more a gentle marking of time passing, of moments changing. Liam was struggling with a zipper that always stuck. "Here, sweetie, let me," I said, my voice still a little shaky. My hands fumbled with the stubborn metal teeth of his navy blue jacket, a jacket that was getting a little too small for him, I noticed with a pang. He'd need a new one for the winter. As I finally coaxed the zipper up, I felt a presence beside us. It was Daniel, shrugging into his own coat. He met my eyes for a brief moment. There was no triumph in his expression, no expectation of thanks. Just a quiet acknowledgement. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, the slightest inclination of his head. I couldn't find the words to thank him. Not adequately. "Daniel," I began, my voice thick. He just offered a tiny smile, a fleeting upturn of his lips. "It's okay, Aunt Sarah," he said softly, then turned and followed his mother, who was already heading out the door, her posture stiff, her usual parting volley of cheerful goodbyes noticeably absent. Liam looked up at me, his eyes shining. "Daniel was really brave, Mom," he whispered. I knelt and hugged him tight, burying my face in his hair, inhaling the scent of boyish shampoo and the lingering sweetness of birthday cake. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered back, my throat tight. Yes, he was. We stepped out into the cool night air. Other family members were saying their goodbyes, voices softer than usual. As we walked towards our car, I could hear the distant clinking of glasses from inside as my mother and perhaps an aunt started to clear the table. The wine glasses clinked, but this time, no one was laughing at me. And in the quiet space Daniel's courage had created, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long, long time. A fragile, tentative hope that things might, just might, be different now. Not a grand victory, but a quiet shift, a boundary drawn not by me, but for me, by the unexpected strength of a boy who chose kindness. And for tonight, that was more than enough.